headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Time to say a very good afternoon to Mr. Ben Habib. Ben, a very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Mike.
Now, it's quite prescient whenever we get you on, because we can also talk about Northern Ireland in a little while, but we wanted to get you on first of all and initially to discuss this extraordinary statistic that came out yesterday. First, the Home Office put a figure out which was bad enough, where they said it was something like £1.5 million a day that they were spending on housing illegal migrants just in the hotels up and down the country. They then corrected that figure to say that actually it was closer to more than 5 million, which is an extraordinary amount of money, isn't it?
Well, it is an extraordinary amount of money when you factor in the recent national insurance increase, for example. You know, this government seems unable to hold on to its assets. It's taxing us and it's leaking cash in directions which the electorate will not forgive them for. You know, in the last few days, we've discovered they wasted £8 billion on PPE equipment. They wasted £4 billion on coronavirus bounce-back loans, which were fraudulent. Now we've got this 5 million a day that's being spent on illegal migrants. None of this you would expect from a competent government, least of all from a Conservative competent government. And, you know, you can draw your own conclusions from that.
Well, I think that is really the problem. And as I always say to people who think that we're being a bit too hard on Boris Johnson, after all, you know, he was the guy that got us out of the European Union. You know, he's the only man that can lead the Tory party to victory at the next general election, and all of the things that people say that he's good at. I mean, this is one of the things that the government promised to fix. I mean, all of last year, practically on a monthly basis, we'd get something from Priti Patel and the Home Office saying they were cracking down on this part of it or that part of it, that they were going to somehow get France to do more on their side. We were going to give money to France. I mean, literally every month there was a new story about how we were cracking down on it, and it's got worse.
Yeah. And it's got worse. I mean, there were crazy stories. They were going to buy up all the dinghies and make sure that the illegal smugglers couldn't get all the dinghies. And then they were going to get them towed back to France. They're going to get the Royal Navy to tow them back to France. Well, that came to nothing. That was last September. And we've had this, you know, the Nationality and Borders Bill has been going through the Commons for ages, and we haven't got on with it. No, I'm afraid this is a government which is very long on rhetoric and very short on action. You know, Boris Johnson is a phenomenal political animal. He's fantastic, perhaps one of the greatest politicians of my lifetime, but he is not a leader. He is not a governor. He's not someone who's able to manage. He doesn't have a genuine vision of the United Kingdom. If he did, he wouldn't know how to plan for it. And if he made a plan, he wouldn't know how to execute it. He's just a campaigner. He's a phenomenal political campaigner, but he's not a competent prime minister. And we are, as we all know, seeing his castle collapse around him as I speak.
Yes. Apparently he's given a sort of rousing speech to about 80 staffers in Downing Street. And the problem that I feel now that is sort of surrounding him is that everything now is basically tailored to saving Boris Johnson. It's got nothing to do with the economy, nothing to do with our borders, nothing to do with our conversations with the European Union. And it's all about saving his backside.
Yeah, and, you know, that's typical Conservative Party, by the way. It's the party first, national interest second, and we see this repeatedly. But Boris Johnson now is unsavable. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And in fact, the longer he stays in office, the more damage he does to this country. You can see that in the way the contempt with it, you know, Putin treats Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
The way that he's laughed at, even in Washington. He's become a caricature of himself. He's always a bit of a caricature, but he's firmly become a caricature of himself. And he's not going to be able to deliver anything without, you know, being seen to be strong, being in control of government. He hasn't got control of number 10. By his own admission, you know, people have been off having parties, doing whatever they like. He hasn't got control of his own house. How the heck is he going to get control of the nation?
Well, that's right.
Impossible.
I mean, I said this earlier on in the week to Bill Wiggin, who came on with a sort of rather, what can be described as weak defence of Boris Johnson and why it was important to keep him where he was. And he said he's going off to Ukraine. I said, what's he going there for? He went to stop a war. I said, he can't even stop a party in his back garden. How's he going to stop a war exactly?
They don't take him seriously. They couldn't care less what Boris Johnson says. I'm afraid that is the standing to which we've been reduced. And don't get me wrong, I think Tony Blair was one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had, and what he did while he was prime minister and the legacy he left. But when he went abroad to meet international statesmen, we were we were putting forward our own statesman. You could be confident that Tony Blair would at least deliver a positive image of the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Boris Johnson doesn't do that. He turns up with his dishevelled hair, his tie not properly done up, suit that really is well past its sell-by date, looking utterly hopeless, talking, 9 to the dozen, most of it's garbage. Yeah. I'm afraid to say he has been found out. You were one of the first people, Mike, who asked me a few months ago, do you think it's time for him to go? And no one was really talking about it. I was kind of gobsmacked when you asked me. But you were absolutely right. You were ahead of the curve, and he's got to go now. He's got to go. He hasn't delivered on any of his promises. You mentioned Northern Ireland. Well, the United Kingdom hasn't Brexited. He hasn't got Brexit done. Every time he gets up in the Commons and says he's got Brexit done, he fails to recognise that we've left Northern Ireland behind. By the government's own lawyer's admission, the Act of Union 1800 no longer stands. How is that getting Brexit done? How are you taking control of your borders if daily you've got illegal immigrants coming in? How is it taking control of your cash if we're still sending oodles of cash over to the EU? How is it taking control of your judicial system if we've got part of the country subject to the hegemony of the European Court of Justice? If we're still signed into the European Convention of Human Rights, we're still signed into the European arrest warrant. There's very little he has got done.
That's right. And looking into Northern Ireland, we now have a situation where there's no First Minister. He resigned yesterday. Apparently, there is now a legal issue going on between the courts and the politicians where something's happened this morning. Not quite sure exactly what it is, but it's got to do with movement of goods across borders and all of that. And as I say, if you talk to Kate Hoey, your colleague on the legal front just some months ago, we spoke to her the other day. She said, there are still things that you can't do as a result of all of this shilly-shallying around, and why they don't just get it organised and just get Article 16 invoked and just get on with it, I don't know.
Absolutely get on with it. I mean, the legal shenanigans today is really interesting. So what's happened today is a couple of people have asked for a judicial review over Poots's instruction not to check goods coming across from Great Britain. And you mentioned our legal action. We've had no progress in our legal action for the last couple of months. All of a sudden this morning, government lawyers are now trying to get an accelerated result to our legal action because they have to deal with this other judicial review. For the first time in a couple of months, I actually got an email from our lawyers telling me what was going on because the government was now chasing. This should have been sorted out months ago.
Yeah.
If the Prime Minister was serious about the country leaving the European Union as one United Kingdom, he would have got this protocol issue sorted out months ago. But I am delighted by the DUP action. I'm delighted that Poots gave the instruction not to check goods coming across from Great Britain. I'm delighted that Givan has stepped down as First Minister and effectively therefore brought Stormont to a close. Because now the responsibility squarely rests on Westminster and our government. And if Boris Johnson wants to save his premiership, here's a bit of advice for Boris Johnson. For goodness sake, you've got nothing to lose. Now take control of the protocol, ditch it, get Northern Ireland back into the United Kingdom and take some really bold action. You have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
You're going to be booted out soon if you don't do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. And I mean, there are those who think that because he is a bit vulnerable at the moment, this is the big time to strike and get the things done that we want done, that he also promised to do. Because it's almost as though, he's been drifting in the last 2 years. And people say, oh, well, he had to battle with coronavirus. And yes, that's true. But he still managed, did he not, to push his green agenda through, the one that Luke Goldsmith and that Zach Goldsmith, rather, and that Carrie, his wife, wants to push through. He managed to organise COP26. He managed to get, the green subsidy put on and continually raised on energy prices, which he refuses to remove, despite the fact that people would like him to. So he has been able to push through policy. He just hasn't done any of the things about migrants and about the economy and about Northern Ireland that he should have done.
Yeah, and that green agenda, look, I don't want to get caught in a debate over whether it's right or not to be, targeting greenhouse gases. But the point about that green agenda, very simply from an economic perspective, is it's going to cost this country £50 billion a year every year. They just raise national insurance to raise $12 billion a year. That doesn't even touch the sides of the cost of that green agenda that he is rolling out. And he's rolling it, he's having a tilt at it ahead of the technology existing to deliver it. The notion that we could be the Saudi Arabia of wind, it makes for a great throwaway line in one of his speeches, but it's an utter ridiculous statement from a leader. It makes no sense. Of course, we can't be the Saudi Arabia of wind. Saudi Arabia's got flipping oil.
Right.
It's a slightly more potent subject than the wind.
Yes, it's also not dependent upon the weather. You still got the oil in the ground, no matter whether it's windy.
Yeah, and he's got to ditch it. He's got to ditch these things that are going to be economic millstones around the neck of the working class of the United Kingdom. That's not what he stood for. He stood for levelling up the country. You don't do it by increasing everyone's cost base. The rich can afford it. It's the working class and the poor who are getting nailed every single step of the way. And again, I heard him say in the Commons the other day, this Conservative government has got the fastest growth in G7 last year, GDP growth last year. This government also had the biggest collapse the year before that. The Tory government, now here's a fact, Mike, which your listeners may not be aware of. After 12 years of Conservative government governance, we have a GDP in dollar terms, which is only 12% bigger than it was in 2010. And in 2010, we were in recessionary times. This government, in real terms, has not grown. This government, sorry, I lost you there a second. This government, in real terms, has not grown GDP over 12 years. But national debt has gone up by a factor of 2.5. It's gone from just under $1 trillion to just over 2 trillion, 2.2 trillion. That is a staggering increase in debt when you think that GDP has hardly budged. This is not just Boris's problem, by the way. This is a real Conservative ideology problem. They've got to cut the state back. They've got to cut taxes. They've got to cut regulations, exactly as Lord Frost said. But sadly, the deal that he's done with the European Union makes it very difficult for him to do that. Coming back to the green agenda, I'm kind of darting around that.
That's all right.
But coming back to the green agenda, the trade and cooperation agreement that we signed with the European Union requires us to commit to climate neutrality by 2050, requires us not to reverse laws that were in existence in the UK at the end of the transition period. Now, at the end of the transition period, you'll recall Theresa May had already signed us into carbon neutrality by 2050. We can't break away from it. We can't break away from this economic self-harm that's being perpetrated. And it's the Conservative government that's responsible. It's the Prime Minister that's responsible. He needs desperately to brush down the promises he made in the Tory party manifesto in 2019 and deliver them. And the first way to do it is to repudiate the Northern Ireland Protocol and then terminate the trade and cooperation agreement he signed with the European Union. Of course, he hasn't got the vision and courage to do it, but that's what he really needs to do.
But that's what he should be doing. But also, could you believe Rishi Sunak yesterday with his supposed, sweetener of money for people, which will not make a jot of difference to most people anyway, because they won't get it. But even if they were to get some kind of council tax rebate to the tune of around about, 12 quid a month, while their energy bills are soaring into the hundreds. I mean, what is going on with a Conservative Chancellor who thinks the way to make life easier for people is to hand them out free money, which was already theirs?
I know. It's this inexorable march of total state control. Again, coming back to GDP, we did grow. Last year we did grow. The economy did grow. But most of it was state-sponsored growth. It wasn't the private sector. Right. The private sector is still in trouble. Yeah. And, and gas prices don't need to go up. Why aren't we using our own natural gas? We've got loads of natural gas, but we're not mining it. We're not extracting it because we've got this flipping green agenda. To reduce the burden of the pain on the working class, why is he not, as he promised he would, cutting back tax on fuel from 7% to nil? Yeah. That's an immediate benefit. Why isn't he doing that? That's a regressive tax. It should never have been introduced. He said in the referendum campaign that if we left the European Union, he would jack it, but he hasn't. He's Prime Minister. He is squarely to blame for all of this.
And I'm afraid you're absolutely right. I can't disagree with a word you say. Ben, great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.